Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to today's Jfokus Brown Bag lunch. Today we have a special guest who will tell us some interesting things about for users with AsciiDoc, and we're going to learn about Antora. And this is good for us. We have both technical writers and developers with us today. But I will soon give the word to Alexander Schwartz. But before I do that, just let me tell you that he's from the company MSG in Germany, and he did speak at the Jfokus in 2018 about Vue.js, JavaScript front-end development, and he is based in Frankfurt. And we will let you go ahead, Alexander, and introduce yourself a little bit more. Very welcome. Please share your screen.
Yes, I do that. I share my screen. And now you should be able to see my screen.
Yes.
Nice, great, that worked. Yeah, very warm welcome from me as well. I'm Alexander, or just Alex. We discussed before, please do ask questions in between. If you ask them by chat, that will be probably the best way to do that. After the talk, we will kind of have a real discussion where you can, well, give your questions either by voice or by chat, your choice. Again, this is going to be like 30 minutes presentation and live demo. Maybe people could, who's actually using AsciiDoc already or AsciiDoc? Maybe people could wave if they have the camera on or put up their hands.
It's fine to
maybe.
Unmute and...
Okay. Oh, some people do already. That's good. People like it. I see some of them at least. That's good. And I've been working with AsciiDoc for some years now. And if you've been using IntelliJ as your editor or development environment, I'm also the current maintainer of the IntelliJ plugin for AsciiDoc that has both AsciiDoc support and Antora support. And we will see during the meeting some examples for that. All right, let's dive in. Yeah, it's about creating a documentation site for users with AsciiDoc and Antora. And well, why do we actually want to create a documentation site? We want to empower our users so they get their work done. They're looking for clues, they have issues, they want to learn about the product we are designing, we want to deliver. And Antora helps us there. It helps us to set up the technical pipeline for that. And it helps us to publish the documentation online that is then always up to date, using continuous integration and delivery if we want that. And every time we update our documentation, it's then published automatically without any additional manual work. It is searchable and topics-based. In the background, you see how the Antora docs look. It's eating your own dog food for the Antora people. When you come to the documentation, you can select the version you're currently viewing. You have different topics where you can navigate. You have a search for the documentation. This is something that users want and need to get their work done. And also all the cross-references will work with Antora. So yeah, whenever you have links that link to other pages within the documentation that lead to other, as we'll introduce later, components or modules that you have in your documentation, all these links will be resolved. If you've been working with AsciiDoc before, this solves a lot of problems that you might have thought, how could I present a multi-page documentation instead of the usual single one long page documentation that you might have used with AsciiDoc? How can I break this down to several pages? How can I have cross-links between these pages? How can I publish different versions? All this is solved with Antora. Yeah. So using AsciiDoc and Antora, what are the tools that we are about to use? Well, I'm always talking about AsciiDoc and AsciiDoctor. Well, AsciiDoc is a language. It's a plain text file where you put in, where you write in your IDE as a text file that is very good to check into your version control like Git. It has a feature-rich syntax. There's some kind of like dribbled down from doc book. So everything that you need to write a real good technical book is in there from a syntax point of view, with great support for tables and admonitions and how to get listings in there and code snippets and syntax highlighting. So all that is there. It's 15 years alive and kicking, and the standardization process started at the Eclipse Foundation with the Eclipse working group there. I'm also part of the working group there, and we try to make sure that there are multiple implementations to choose from, but that they all evolve around the same syntax, that there's going to be like a TCK to make sure that you can switch implementations but keep your documents. That is the idea of this working group, and also get vendors of IDEs together, and so they can exchange their ideas about features and everything. And AsciiDoc it's one of the tool chains, the tool chain that creates, for example, HTML or PDFs from AsciiDoc files. It's an open source implementation. It runs on either Java, Ruby, or JavaScript runtimes. Inside it's all Ruby, but then it's going to be transpiled to JavaScript. And AsciiDoc is what powers Antora inside when it converts AsciiDoc to HTML. And Antora then does all the wires around it to make a full documentation site out of this HTML. Writing in your IDE, well, it should be frictionless. As a developer, I don't want to switch apps to a different editor. I know my IDE, how to handle my version control, how to annotate changes in there. So I want to have everything in my IDE, not only writing code, but also documentation. I want to collaborate using version control. And well, there's an AsciiDoc plugin for IntelliJ, as I mentioned, that supports both AsciiDoc and Antora. And we will see that live in a minute. There are several other live editors on, if you go, for example, to the AsciiDoc homepage, there are several implementations. But users tell me, well, the other implementation don't have yet so good support for Antora. So if you want to go for Antora, you might want to have a look at IntelliJ. And the good news is this plugin runs both on the Ultimate Edition that you have to pay money for, and also on the Community Edition that's free of charge. So what does Antora bring to the game? So it's all about publishing documentation, and it gives your documentation structure. It gives you the idea of what are components, what are modules, how to link them together, how to collect content from multiple repositories and branches. If you're a software developer, you then usually have each minor release in a different branch. They also might have a different documentation, and you want to pull this documentation from these branches to Antora and publish your documentation site. And it, again, as I said, it uses AsciiDoc to convert your AsciiDoc to HTML, and then merges some HTML to get a real nice UI for a static site. The good news is, well, for a Java developer, it's probably not the good news. It's based on Node, so it's all JavaScript inside. But the good news is it has minimal dependencies. It's quite fast and modular and extendable. Setting up Antora, as I said, there are some concepts that Antora brings to the setup. The top level structuring element is a component. A component has a version and a name. So everything that you would release on a separate release schedule or with a separate build would be versioned by component level. And within a component, you can have lots of modules in there, and these modules belong to their components. And you can quite easily link between these modules. That these kind of links can always link to the to another module in the same component with the same version. Then below modules, you will have Antora calls it families. It's basically a folder as it ends up, a folder for pages, a folder for images, a folder for examples, attachments, and partials. Partials are snippets to be included in multiple places. So it gives you a structure, how to organize your content. If you're just using AsciiDoc, you will not have that. You will have to think about how to structure your documentation. If you're using Antora, you will have this structure that has worked for other people as well before. And an advanced feature is that you can distribute components across. A component doesn't have to live in one Git repository. It can pull content, or it can be distributed to different Git repositories. It's a feature that is there when you want to use it. But you probably shouldn't start with that feature. But it makes sometimes it's sometimes an option that you can choose when you are in a real world scenario where you want to have content in different Git repositories that are then usually combined in a big build to build software. You can do the same with Antora as well. Looking at the process of Antora, the process is the user runs Antora. It's a command line tool. You can wrap it into, as we see, as package JSON and some package managing using Node. But in the end, you have one command line that you run with Antora, and then Antora starts off and loads a playbook. A playbook is a YAML file with a list of repositories and branches where it should pull the content from. It clones all these Git repositories that you referenced in Antora, creates the HTML output from AsciiDoc, merges it with the UI themes and customizations that you did, and generates maybe a search index if you want to have a search index, and finally create an output folder for a static site. Questions so far? Not in the chat yet.
No questions in the chat. Anybody else? If you want to ask a question, it's fine to unmute.
Do you know how widespread the use of AsciiDoc is outside open source?
I know companies who run on AsciiDoc. Some run on Confluence, and the other run on on AsciiDoc. And I see people trying out Markdown and people moving over from Markdown to AsciiDoc. I've never met a person moving from AsciiDoc to Markdown. For example, if you go to the Write the Docs community on Slack, there's a channel with enthusiasts about AsciiDoc, and also other languages where you can compare. All right. So if you want to set up Antora, you will probably need to have a write. You have different roles in your project, and one role would be an author, and also that is that need to have some professional skills in writing. And what they would need a Git to collaborate with other authors, because Antora is based on Git, and AsciiDoc skills to create some content. And from a technical infrastructure, they would need an IDE with Git support, AsciiDoc and Antora support, plus maybe Node.js installed to run Antora on for a local site preview build. You can put it into a Docker container if you want to, but that's a choice that you have. Plain Node.js works quite well. You would need to have somebody who's then setting up the automation that we talked about earlier. Somebody who's probably good with Git, can do the YAML configuration, configure some package JSON for version management, like what version of Antora do I want to use, what versions of the plugins of Antora do I want to use, put it all into package JSON, and then sets up a continuous integration server to publish the documentation, either to a preview stage or maybe then also directly to production. That's your choice. And finally, while a little bit of web development is required, while you have a default theme that works okay, but then if you want to make it, if you want to have a navigation bar that is matching the project you're working on, if you want to link to your maybe company web page, if you want to link to maybe a blog in the headline of Antora, then you need to do some customizations in HTML and CSS. Right, and these again need some Node.js running locally and some skills on HTML and CSS. Right. So let's dive into the first steps of how an Antora site looks like. Basically, you start with one folder for each component that you want to have. And this component contains then an Antora YAML file. And the Antora YAML file, that use that to give the component a name and a version. And below that component folder, you will have a folder called modules. And in this modules folder, you will find the modules. Root would be the default folder, but you can have any number of other folders, like this a named module down here. And in these folders, then you will have lots of these page families I talked about earlier. But as you want to have a start page, you will put an index ASCIiDoc in the pages folder, and also add this, create a navigation outline in the file nav ASCIiDoc. Let's look at this live, and I switch to IntelliJ, and I will show how the setup works for actually the IntelliJ plugin for AsciiDoc is using Antora to publish its own documentation, and we're now looking at the structure that we have here. So I've chosen to have two components here. One is going to be the contributors guide, the other one the users guide. If I then look here, okay, I have to specify the name and the version. So the version is going to be master here. So I publish only one version here, and on the website later on, you will see that you can't see the documentation of older versions of the plugin. That's something that's on my list, to have also documentation for older versions. But so far it works for me that I maintain only one single documentation. This is the navigation. I pointed to a navigation file that is usually in the top. I put it in the root folder. I can add some attributes to AsciiDoc. People who are familiar with AsciiDoc might know that you can configure the page rendering and some characteristics of AsciiDoc with setting some attributes, and you can set them on a component level. And then, you see here my folders with all the images and pages. And as I said, the index ASCIiDoc is here as a start page, and the preview is now initializing. Sort of needs to warm up a bit. So that's all. It's based on Java. Sorry for that. There we go. So what I see here is the preview of the documentation on the right, and my documentation on the left. I can customize the navigation type with the description in here. I have section headings here. That's the usual AsciiDoc syntax. I have a an unnumbered list here. I have now links to other, to cross-referenced pages within the same modules here. So if you're using of IntelliJ, you see, okay, this is highlighting. I can, with a hotkey Control B, I can follow this link to the other page. So I end up with a quick start here. Yeah, I also enabled this image, this page to also render on correctly on GitHub. So I have some conditional rendering in here. I have an admonition here, like a call out saying, warning, please use the pre-bundled JetBrains OpenJDK 11 runtime with the IDE and nothing else. I have a screenshot in here to guide the users, and all the images live in images over here. Yeah, so this is how editing content works in IntelliJ if you have this Antora support. As I also said, there's a navigation, and navigation is basically nothing else like an ordered list in AsciiDoc. So you have the first level going to be is 2 asterisks. You have a second level with 2 asterisks, and the third level, and you can order the content that you have. If you then use this topic-based writing, 1 topic per page. You can link between topics. You have the topics in the defined order in the outline. Yeah. So this is how this then looks like when you're writing docs. Yeah, I was very happy when IntelliJ added some. I think it was in last year when they added the language toolkit, so new support to IntelliJ. So it now has some grammar checking as well for English language. So it spots my mistakes as a non-native writer there. That's nice. It supports also some other languages, but yeah, German is there as well. But I don't have the full list of supported languages available. Yeah, that's how writing docs looks like. Okay, so where we left off. Okay, so now we have all the content, so that's nice. And now, well, then there's the playbook I talked about earlier. And when you're setting up Antora, you probably need 2 playbooks. One for authors to generate a local preview that pulls information from maybe the head of a checked out Git repository locally, and another playbook later on that pulls all the Git branches from a remote location and creates the real side of it. So that's where you need 2 playbooks with 2 different configurations. One for the authors, then you set up a package JSON file to install Antora. Well, if you go to the quick start guide for Antora, you say, well, just install it globally, locally, but then you will not have a full control about the version people use. So my recommendation would be to add a package JSON file. In the package JSON file, you can specify the version of Antora that you're about to use, and you can also customize the command line and also add all the plugins that you want to use for Antora. Once you have a playbook, you also then need to specify a UI theme or create your own. I'm not a web developer, so I did only customizations using supplemental files. We will look at that in a minute. And once the local preview looks good for you, you start well, copying over the playbook you created before and do some final customizations to publish it to production and setup. So looking over, so this was the one Git repository where the plugin lives and all the documentation lives as well. So I can branch and tag it at the same time. That's really convenient for me. But I then decide, okay, the web page that hosts the documentation, well, it needs to have a start page. A start page is not part of Antora usually. You use then maybe a different static site generator for that. All the UI, CSS, and customizations I did, I put all that in a different Git repository. And this is, I think, a common practice that I see as well in other projects. And yeah, looking at the Antora playbook for authors, what you define here, you give your site a name. You say, okay, what should be the start page and what component should be the start page that if people go just to this documentation link here. This is now for, as I said, the author's playbook. So I have now here a relative URL to a checked out Git repository, and I tell it, okay, there are two start paths for the two components that I have, the user's guide and the contributor's guide. And as this is for authors and the local preview, I tell it, okay, always use head, use the checked out version in my sandbox to generate a local preview. And the bundle, I use this as a slightly customized UI bundle. That's a zip file that's, yeah, you can download from Antora. And then you can override different templates in there. I overwrote some, several ones, but I had some more scripts, some more header styles. But well, what you probably want to override would be the footer. Sorry, the footer added the footer content when you want to. I should have probably add some word wrap here. So if you want to have a footer page that is matching your site, you want to tell them where your Git repo, that is what plugin you're using or link to a homepage. This is something you would put in the footer, and then you would override the footer content. The same goes for the header content. All the links that you want to have in the top row in the navigation bar are in the header content template, and then you can put any HTML in there, links to any documentation or other site that you want to have in here. So I would say usually you can start with a UI bundle zip and override these two files, and then you will have a basic setup that looks the same like the Antora UI, but with the links that work for your project. So let's see how this site looks like. Okay, this is the Antora site. This is the navigation bar, the big black bar on the very top, where they've chosen to, well, maybe link to a repository, to the issue tracker. This is all part of the UI the customized UI template. And everything else below that black bar is then the standard UI theme. If you go to the footer, you will see the standard footer. And yeah, of course, people want to customize that. If you if I go to the user guide of the plugin, you see, okay, I didn't like the black bar. I customized it to be light. I added my own links for user guide and contributors guide, and added a different footer, and the rest looks basically the same. Yeah, I will zoom in a bit. Right. Ines is asking, do you see any drawback in this setup, things that can't be done and are commonly used in tech writing, maybe? Right. So this setup works quite well with well, technical writing. You can also include code snippets in the examples folder. Maybe a bit of shortcoming in the current Antora 2.3 is and this being discussed how to resolve this best. All the examples need to be in the examples folders to get snippets from them. Some did some build automation to copy over the examples from their real source code into the examples folder of Antora, and then create documentation from there. Or maybe other people did some extensions, but that's something that makes maybe existing AsciiDoc users or AsciiDoc users not so happy, but it's workable. Yeah, maybe Ines, you have to give me some more examples maybe later on, and I can answer that more to the point.
Sure.
And Helena is asking, is there a viewer in online tools like GitHub? A viewer in online tools like GitHub. Helena, can you?
Yeah, I was just, I'm not a technical writer, so this is not my expertise, but I'm just thinking in Confluence, we edit the document that we see. So,
Right.
and this is static information, right? So
Right.
you'd have to change it in the version tool.
Right. So, yeah. So what you can do, there's a link, edit this page here, and this will take you to GitHub or maybe Bitbucket, whatever you use.
Yeah.
And this is what GitHub offers you, and I don't like it.
Yeah, but that's what I meant. So there's
Yeah.
obviously
Yeah.
go to the source.
Yeah, it's go to the source. There's a preview like this that you can switch tabs here, but I'm quite used to side by side. So I really want to have it better, and I think this is a shortcoming today, that you have a real live editor. And what the little pet project of mine is how could an AsciiDoc editor look like on the web if it's done well properly? And so this is something I started. It's only a proof of concept, but it gives you this. This is all just web, and it gives you. It's already integrated with GitHub a little bit, so I can have at least a side-by-side preview, not a really WYSIWYG editor for AsciiDoc. That you have a syntax highlighting on the left, a preview on the right, like you have it in IntelliJ. This is, and if I start editing here, okay, it doesn't scroll yet. But if I type, I can also scroll in a bit. It's maybe a bit short. So it behaves really like an IDE, and this is something I would expect from GitHub or any other editing service as well. And I can then say, okay, discard changes, maybe give a preview like this. That is something that the AsciiDoc plugin doesn't have yet, but a preview that shows me the changes highlighted.
Yes.
I think this is something users would like to see, but it's not yet available as a standard integration of GitHub. Maybe people discuss ideas with me or join this open source experiment here to get into a real product people can use. Robin was asking, can you generate graphics, for example, from plant UML or Graphis? Yes, you can. There's Croki and Antora integrate. Croki, AsciiDoc. And so this is another extension that you can integrate. And if you browse down here, it explains you how to integrate this with Antora. So it's something that you can configure as an extension, and you can choose. The Croki is a rendering service that usually you have an URL, you encode your diagram base 64 style, and then you have a URL that you can embed as an image in your documentation. So sounds nice. You can even, it's open source, you can host it within your company. So if you don't want to pull something from the web, from the public web. And Crookey has two options when you integrate with Antora. You can tell it to fetch the diagrams at build time. So once you publish a static site, once you publish a static site, all the diagrams will already be rendered. Carl asked if there's a new version of AsciiDoc coming up. Well, not that I'm aware of. Hopefully, the standardization organization will steer that effort, but not that I'm aware of. Okay, but I think we entered the discussion with lots of questions already. Let's open up the real discussion.
Okay, and then Matthias is going to end the recording.
Perfect. I will. Thanks for the talk.
Thank you very much. And do you want to keep sharing, or should we let people out in gallery?